when they get together and talk, they all talk about, like, we all believe in Sanguma. But if you can see below the surface, you realize that what they're talking about is often quite different. And are they talking about the thing that lives inside a person, or are they talking about the techniques that have been learned? Are they talking about objects that are held?
Welcome to Witch Hunt, the podcast bringing you news from the front lines in the effort to eliminate sorcery accusation-related violence. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
And I'm Sarah Jack. Today we'll be talking about accusations of witchcraft that can have deadly consequences.
We'll be exploring the cultural and religious dynamics that contribute to this violence and the devastating impact it has on individuals and communities.
We'll also discuss the challenges of addressing sorcery accusation-related violence and the efforts being made to challenge it.
We're honored to have Anton Lutz join us today to shed light on this important issue. Anton is a human rights defender who has dedicated his life to working with victims of sorcery accusation-related violence, or SARV, and advocating for change.
Let's get started and learn more about Papua New Guinea. Welcome to Witch Hunt, Anton Lutz. We're looking forward to learning from your unique blend of lived experience in Papua New Guinea and the development of your curriculum project. Can you give us a brief background about yourself and work?
Hi, my name is Anton Lutz. I'm a human rights defender and activist in the sorcery violence space in Papua New Guinea. I've been doing this work there for around 8 years, and there's always something new that I'm learning and things that I'm trying to communicate. My background in Papua New Guinea is that I was raised there. My father and my mother were medical missionaries from the US that were based there. And so I grew up there and returned to work there 20 years ago in rural development. I built an airstrip and did various things, and then found that people in the community where I had been raised were very keen on burning people they called witches. And that was something I wanted to take a stand against. And yeah, I'm sure we'll get into that as the episode progresses.
Thank you. What should we know about Papua New Guinea before we talk about the sorcery accusations?
Everything. Papua New Guinea is one of the most interesting and diverse places in the world. It's famous for being linguistically diverse. The eastern half of the island is the nation of Papua New Guinea. The western half is the Indonesian province of Papua and West Papua. And together they have over 1,000 languages that are spoken there, which is more than 15% of the world's languages, living languages. The Papua New Guinean side has around 800 languages, which means over 800 cultures, which means 800 different kinds of beliefs about magic and about the supernatural world and about how to live well with others. And there have been people there from the earliest migrations out of Africa into this part of the world, where people came in at the time, the larger landmass of Sahul, which is Australia and New Guinea and Tasmania combined into one landmass with lower sea levels. And they crossed here 65,000 years ago, give or take. And after sea level rose, they were then isolated for 40,000 years. And finally, the Austronesian people came from Taiwan through the Philippines into the New Guinea area, and then from there on into the wider Pacific, becoming the cultures that we now recognize as Pacific cultures, getting as far as Hawaii and Easter Island, and then finally from there moving to New Zealand and discovering New Zealand and populating that hundreds of years before the Europeans decided to go and try to find out what's on the other side of the planet. In many parts of the highlands, the first contact with anyone who was not the next door tribe was in the 1930s and 1940s and 1950s, and in some places the 1960s. And so there are people that are alive today who I know who were teenagers, were young adults, were married, actually, probably as teenage marriage, but still, they were married when the first white person hiked into the valley, and they discovered that they were on an island that's surrounded by an ocean on a planet that has other people living on it, and they had not known that. So it's an incredible story of change that these people have lived through and are living through. And of course, since independence in 1975, 49 years ago, that there's these growing pains that we have there. And the situation with regard to sorcery accusation-related violence is different across the 22 provinces of Papua New Guinea, but there are some similarities we can talk about. Gosh, what else? People are generous and amazing, and the landscape is so diverse, from sort of what you would picture as the Australian outback, flatlands down in the south in Western Province, and then up into alpine, up to 15,000 feet elevation mountains up there that get snow and have glaciated valleys up on them, and then back down to the Sepik River with all of its, just so much diversity and so much beauty. And I'm amazed that I can call that place home. Yeah.
That's amazing. What do we need to understand about what's happening there with violence?
I think violence has a long history there. There's evidence that in many communities, there were people being violent to their enemies, certainly, but also sometimes to their loved ones, to their own children, to their wives, going all the way back. I don't think that's anything new in particular. The degree of the violence, the kind of violence, though, the cruelty that we're now seeing, and especially when it comes to tribal warfare and sorcery violence, and even some gender-based violence or intimate partner violence, we're seeing just really sadistic, cruel, sexualized treatment of others, torture. And I think that is new as well. Violence in general, I think it's hard to summarize. If you look up Papua New Guinea and violence, you'll see many horrific stories that are on the internet. They're published in the newspapers in PNG and by journalists around the world. And that is all there. And I think the thing to note about all of that is that for many people, it is accepted and expected. And people think that this is a normal way to be, and that it's normal for a boyfriend or a husband to beat his wife. It's normal for a community to torture someone they think is a witch. And it's normal for, in a tribal fight, if you've killed your enemy warrior, to desecrate his body and mutilate it. And they just think that that's normal. And I'm not sure what the history books and the psychologists will say about what has happened to a society when violence becomes that normal. What made that happen? I'm not sure we can detail all of it yet, but it's happened, and the violence is pervasive and very commonplace. And it's hard to see that happening to people who want to live in peace.
Definitely. How did you first become aware of sorcery accusation-related violence, and what drew you to work in that area?
I think I've told the story several different ways, different times I'm asked. And the way that is now sitting with me is that this is something that my interest in sorcery violence goes back to people I was working with in quite a remote part of the country that had first contact in the 60s and 70s. There were some anthropological papers written in the 70s by a guy named Lyle Steadman. So this is the Hewa part of Papua New Guinea, up in the Central Highlands. What's now Hela Province was then Southern Highlands Province, in the Lagaip River Valley. And these are people that had long held beliefs that there is no death in our community apart from that which is caused by witches. And by witches, we now translate in English, is a version of the Tokpisin word Sanguma, which is a version of their own word, which is Pisai. And they believe that these Pisai people had a being that lived inside of them that was contagious. So two women sleeping in a house by the river could pass this being from one to the other. If one of these people who had this being gave you a piece of sweet potato and you took it, it might actually be a piece of meat, which was disguised as sweet potato, spiritually disguised, which interestingly, like Christians have beliefs about things that you eat that aren't actually what you think they are when you eat them. and so forth. But they had this belief as well that the sweet potato could actually be a piece of meat, and that by eating this piece of meat, you could then get infected with this peace-eye spirit, or invisible being, I guess. Spirit is also an English word that we probably shouldn't be using, but this invisible being that lives inside of you that can then go forth and eat people's hearts and their life force and cause them to get sick and die. And that if you coerce this human who is the host of this creature and demand, tell her to stop, or tell her to give you compensation in the form of pigs or shell money, or threaten her, then she would be able to control this spirit being enough that it would no longer go and kill others. So I'd heard these stories, and I had tried to raise my eyebrows as much as I could and say, this sounds like things that, of course, I'd heard of the Salem witch trials, and I heard of the burning people at the stake in Europe and so forth. And I was like, that's things that we used to do and we grew out of a long time ago, but you guys still think this is on. Like, this is crazy. You can't be doing this. And so I had these interactions in my 20s and didn't really think much of it. And then found that a version of this violence was then happening further to the east, where I was doing most of my life and work, among the Enga people, which had no such beliefs in their history. And so their history had to do with, there's ancestral ghosts that must be appeased. And so you're talking to beings in the sky that are not associated with humans. There's no one to torture. There's no one to coerce. There's no one to convince. You're just talking to ghosts. And if you can successfully talk to ghosts, then good on you. You might get healthy again. And if you can't, then you'll probably die. So very different belief systems. Of course, they're different languages. They're different cultures. They have different histories. And they had different belief systems. And yeah, and then this belief about the being that lives inside of you has migrated, has followed people, has moved word of mouth. And now the Engan people believe this. And they have resorted to not just demanding pigs and money and wealth from people who they think are causing these problems in their communities, but they are torturing and murdering them. And we began seeing this as early as 2010 and onwards. I didn't really become aware of it. It was quite sporadic until 2014, 2015. And then I had people showing up on my doorstep saying, so-and-so is being tortured. Can we go help her? And I jumped in the truck and drove off, tried to get the police to go, and so on. So my in-person involvement in that really began in 2015. I was involved with tortured people and with rescuing people and taking them to hospital and finding safe houses for them and buying mattresses and clothing for them because they'd lost everything, had their houses burned, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so that's sort of how I got launched into it.
What are the cultural, religious, and social dynamics that are perpetuating the sorcery accusation-related violence?
Like I mentioned before, I think there's so much that is not documented, not fully understood about the traditional, and by traditional, I mean pre-contact belief systems. And when we say that, we can also note that these belief systems have changed very rapidly and are no longer what they were. So what the anthropologists in the 70s and 80s went and documented and wrote down for the first time ever, that this is what these people say they believe, is no longer necessarily the case. That might be what their grandparents believed, but the new generation has gone to school, they are watching movies, they are reading books, they are traveling overseas, and they have a different worldview. They are mixing their Christianity with what their grandparents believed in a whole new way. And what of that is being documented and well understood, I think, is minimal. There's very little that's actually formally being studied about how all of this is coming together. And yeah, what we're seeing is this evolving of worldview. And because it is so disparate to begin with, we can't say there is a Papua New Guinean culture. There are Papua New Guinean cultures, but there is not one that is pervasive everywhere. And I think we can still see the diversity and the nuance from within their origins. And there's also now a lot of mixed parentage, as they call it there. where your mother is from one culture and your father's from a different culture, a different province, a different part of the island. And so then you're growing up with very different, your mother's family believes one thing, your father's family believes something quite different. And so then what do you believe? It's both, it's neither, it's something new that you are creating in your own head. And so it's highly complex. I think there are many cultures in PNG that many tribes, many languages, many areas that traditionally had belief in a person who was able to do magical kinds of things, what we in English would call magical. So they were able to maybe have influence over the weather or sickness or birth or tell the future or give good fortune in warfare, these kinds of things, and protective magic of various kinds. So that was sort of your shaman, your witch doctor, your sorcerer kind of figure, often well respected, usually male. And so many people are like, I'm descended from a line of sorcerers. My grandfather was a powerful sorcerer, and then he became a Christian. So now he's not anymore. But if you mess with me, I'll tell him, and he'll whip out the old gear and he'll get even with you. And so you hear that kind of talk. Whether they actually believe that their grandfather could actually cause you to fall dead at 50 paces with no physical implements, I don't know. But they talk like they do. There's then this subset of traditions that talk about this evil thing that lives inside of people, maybe old people, maybe women, in a few places it's men, and that they're the ones responsible for death in the village, and they should control this spirit thing better. They should have a better reign on it. They shouldn't just let it out so often. And so, and we can still see the confusion in the language. So this word I mentioned earlier, sanguma, is a word that is very confused across Papua New Guinea. And you can see it in the grammar of how it's used. You can say, she did sanguma, or she is sanguma. So is this an ontological characteristic? Is this like a choice she has made? Is this a practice she is doing? Like, these are all different concepts, but the way it just rolls off your tongue, and she is sanguma, or she's doing sanguma. Like, these are very different things. In the way that in English, we would have confusion over someone is a witch or someone is being a witch, or they are doing witchcraft. And these are actually quite different ideas about how the bad thing is happening and why. I think a further level of confusion and potentially foundation for violence is the Christian beliefs that have been introduced, and especially the ideas that there is a mega powerful evil being named Satan who has very powerful demons that can walk the earth and inhabit people, and that they are totally real because the Bible said they are. And so therefore we have to preach about them. And I think that has really resonated with a lot of people there. And they have thought that, well, this backs up what I was told by my grandfather in the village, which some missionaries would have said, well, what your grandfather believed, those were heathen ideas, or those were pagan ideas, or those were animistic ideas. And you shouldn't believe them. You should just believe the Christian faith that we're now teaching. But I think some missionaries were much more syncretic in their approach, and they just mixed things together, and they said, well, the spirit that you believe in, he's actually a demon, so don't believe in him. And they just like mixed these, Middle Eastern ideas that had morphed into European ideas, and then they brought them from Europe to the Pacific, and then labeled Pacific beliefs with European words. And so now we have, for instance, this Pisai character, this creature that lives inside of women in the Hewa. We call that witchcraft. It actually has nothing to do with witchcraft, right? It's completely different. It's their own belief. It's their own tradition. It has nothing to do with what Europeans knew as witchcraft and what we defined it as, and how that word developed over the centuries in Europe. Yeah, so it's very interesting. And in its sort of academic curiosity in my mind, sometimes I get distracted from the fact that whatever this backstory is, the etymology of these ideas, when it comes to practice, there is someone who is being stripped naked, tortured horribly, and murdered. Like, all of it boils down to people being killed in horrific ways. And yeah, and that's really tragic. And that's something that is a challenge, I guess, to try to figure out how do we unpack enough to help people see through the veil that is in front of them without confusing them too much with the semantics, the etymology, the history of all of it, if that makes sense.
I have so many questions about what you've just said, but I think the one I'll go with is, are you seeing patterns as far as what types of people get targeted or what types of people are doing the violence?
In terms of who is targeted, there's nothing conclusive in the research that has been done so far on this. And I think, to me, that simply goes back to the idea that there are 800 plus traditional cultures with modern variants. So we're talking times 2, times 10, times who knows how many new subsets of these cultures we could say. And so it's hard to make any generalizations about anything in PNG. One of the things that I think the research would bear out is that people believe that the evil is contagious in some way, like from mother to daughter, or from friend to girlfriend, or someone you shook hands with, or like there's always a physical, genetic proximity that is involved. And so it's rare that just a total stranger would get accused. They'd be like, well, we killed one last week, and her friend, her next door neighbor, is acting suspicious now, so let's kill her. Or we killed her mother, so it's probably the daughter. And there's some kind of a connection that can be made. In many parts of the country, it is women who are mostly targeted. We can't even really say it's usually single women or widowed women or elderly women. It's a combination of young women, married women, single women, widows, people who are beautiful, people who are not, people who are mentally disabled, people who are not. I think we would find that it's rare that it's the most popular people in a community, and it's rare that it's the people who are best connected in a community. Although we have a case where someone who is not considered beautiful by their community, who was a bit off in the head, was accused, and then she said, well, this other lady was doing it with me under torture. And so they rounded up the more physically attractive, the more well-connected wife of a leader and tortured the two of them together. And so when they finally, the family of the more well-connected one showed up and said, hey, like, why are we torturing these ladies? Cut it out. And they rescued both of them. And then that led to years of court cases from the woman who was better connected, trying to get compensation from the one who was less attractive and saying, you're the one who got me tortured, so thanks a lot, and now you owe me, and you shouldn't have named me, and so forth. So she was sort of accidentally tortured, and then the one who should have been tortured was the one who was, socially acceptably tortured. So there's those kinds of interactions that we see. I've seen cases where people were accusing each other over 5 kina, so that's a little over $1 worth of peanuts. And there was an argument about a peanut garden and who planted the peanuts and how much they were worth, and then they grew. And so when we harvested them, they were now worth this much, and then the wrong person sold them. And and then there was some jealousy over it was now $20 instead of 5. And so now you're a witch. You shouldn't have done that. You're a witch. And it's like, these are just poor people. Like, this is poverty. There's an element where this is poverty. These are poor people who are desperate, who are fighting for a place at the margins of their community, that are turning on each other so they don't get left out themselves. And yeah, so we see that. And there's often an element of outsiders who are attacked. So in many parts of PNG, women leave their clan or tribe of origin, and they go and live with their husband's clan when they get married. And so they're there without their cousins, without their uncles, without their fathers, without their grandfathers, without their brothers. And they're very much alone. And if that tribe of men, who are all brothers, cousins, uncles, the men all stay put, and they bring women in and they send their sisters out to go get married outside. These women who come in are each alone in some very fundamental way. And they can try to form a bond of sisterhood within their tribe where they've married in, but they're still, if they get accused, the other women are like, what's the English word? Bye, Felicia. We don't know you. We don't want anything to do with you. We're going to let you be tortured on your own and hope we're not next. Whereas if that was happening in their own tribe, her father would show up and be like, no way, you're torturing my daughter. So yeah, in terms of perpetrators, it's almost always young men. And in some places, they say that the young men are enabled or egged on by the elder men in the community. So that if you sit down afterwards and talk with the men who did the torture, they say, well, we wouldn't have done it, but the leaders told us to do it, or the leaders urged us to go and do it. And I think there's an element of truth to that there is a complicity at a minimum, if not authority, that is given to these, or an authorization, I should say, that's given to these times of torture. And it's a whole mob effect. It's not 2 or 3 people. It's dozens of people, hundreds of people sometimes, that are observing, participating, cheering it on, videoing it, photographing it, uploading it. So this is what we're seeing. It's interesting that many times the perpetrators, after some time has passed, they can turn around and say, I realize that what I did is wrong, and I repent of this, and I don't want to go face the police, but I am willing to go stand up in public and speak about why we shouldn't be behaving the way I behaved. I was wrong. And so it's, yeah, makes me think that the level of their conviction was not as deep as some people think, that they were not fully convinced that this is a good thing to do, but simply got caught up in a hysteric kind of moment where they were influenced by the group, by the fever of the moment, and decided to do this and did this. Yeah, so many just fascinating dynamics, that all of which I think are not necessarily research-based, but it's very hard to do research into this for the reasons I've mentioned. And so I think maybe what we're left with are these anecdotes and these observations from one-off cases. But it's hard to extrapolate from this to say this is true of everything we see. Yeah, but those are big trends that we see. Should also be noted, of course, that in the island of Bougainville, it's predominantly men and boys that are accused and tortured. So they have a different set of beliefs about the supernatural there, and they believe that it's more plausible that men are responsible than women. And yeah, so we see a lot more boys and men murdered there than women.
This concept of Sanguma, is this pretty widespread across different cultures, or is it particular to certain provinces?
Yeah, the belief about so I think almost everyone would say that they believe in Sanguma. What they mean by that will be diverse and regionally specific, I think. But then noting, of course, that people move a lot for work, for education, for just going shopping. To go from where I grew up in Wapiramanda across to Hagen, the main city in the highlands, for shopping, you have to cross 3 language groups, through 3 different cultures to get there. And it's an 1.5-hour drive, and you've now crossed 1 provincial boundary. You drive another 30 minutes, you're in another province. So these are very small tribes, very small cultures, very small languages, very small provinces. So to say there's anything consistent or regionally specific doesn't necessarily always hold true. That being said, the word Sanguma has different meanings through time and across different parts of the country. In its place of origin on the north coast of the island, it had to do with people who claimed to be using magic to go and do assault on their enemies. So when I read about this in the first documentation of it from the 1920s and 30s, it's essentially a form of assault, like ninja terrorism or something. So these guys go to school, they learn how to do their special skill, and then they go and attack the guys from the neighboring tribe, get one of them alone in the coconut plantation, and each one of them does something horrible to him, like pounding spikes from a certain palm tree into his ear, or putting sand under his eyelids, or making him drink terrible things, or whatever it is. And then the role of the last person is to perk him up enough to make him stumble back to his village and cry out, "The Sanguma have killed me," and then lie around rolling in pain for a couple days and then die. And if you just kill him in the field, that's just a murder. That's not a Sanguma attack. A true Sanguma attack is designed to cause terror in the next village. You want him to be screaming in pain for days at a time while he dies from his injuries. And telling people, and these are secret injuries. They're not like obvious injuries. They're secret injuries, so that you then tell people, well, we didn't kill him. It was the spirits that killed him, or it was magic that killed him. It was our powerful sorcery that killed him. So don't mess with us or our grandfathers. And so it was this sort of intimidate the neighbor kind of, and you tell big stories about what you're doing. Oh, we moved so silently, we were invisible, and we became so small like ants, and that's how we snuck into your village. And we escaped like flying foxes, what they call bats. We flew away like bats afterwards because we can fly. And you tell all these big stories to add that much more terror and fear to your enemies. So that's what a Sanguma was. It was one of these trained sorcerer-ish, ninja-ish assassin boys, young men who did this thing. The word then moved up as the rest of the island began learning this Tokpisin language, the Melanesian Pidgin language. The rest of the island began learning what this word was, but they didn't have a culture that there were trained people running around doing this kind of thing to their enemies. They had cultures that believed that there was a being that lived inside of women that came out from them and sucked people's energy like a flying invisible vampire thing. And there was other cultures that believed that you could do protective magic. And so this word Sanguma became an umbrella term that incorporated all of these diverse meanings. And so today you have people that say, well, we know what Sanguma is. And what they're thinking is, it's the shaman in my village. He's my respected uncle who no one messes with. But when you want good grades, you go and you give him a chicken, and he does something with some leaves and spits a few things in the right direction, and then I get better grades on my next report card. And he's my Sanguma, and I trust him and I believe him. And why would I kill him? He's my uncle. He's great. Whereas in other cultures, a couple hundred miles away, you have people who are like, well, that one over there, she's a Sanguma. Her mother was a Sanguma. We murdered her. We're probably going to murder this one if she messes up. And then you go a couple hundred miles away and they believe something different about Sanguma. But when they get together and talk, they all talk about, like, we all believe in Sanguma. But if you can see below the surface, you realize that what they're talking about is often quite different. And are they talking about the thing that lives inside a person? Or are they talking about the techniques that have been learned? Are they talking about objects that are held? These are all quite diverse and different specifics and nuances that are there. So I don't know if that helps clarify any of this for you, but definitely. Yeah, this is kind of the complexity that's there. And then you add in words like sorcery and witchcraft, and that makes it all the more complex. And especially because we have the words sorcery and witchcraft are not only in English Bibles, but the word Sanguma is in the Tokpisin Bible. which to me is highly irregular because there is no way that people 3,000 to 4,000 years ago in the Middle East believed that there was this creature that lived inside of women in the Chimbu province of Papua New Guinea and could go forth and eat the life energy of others and come back into them. That is not what people in Mesopotamia or the Canaanite areas were believing. They had their own beliefs, equally interesting, equally complex, but they were not those beliefs. And so we should not be taking words like Sanguma and putting them into the Bible and saying Sanguma is real because it's in the Bible. Like, that's irresponsible.
Yeah, it really reinforces any existing belief.
Yeah.
And Sanguma, definitely, to see it printed and all these people with modern technology are showing up at your doorstep with this wonderful book, and it's right there, Sanguma.
Yep.
So,
Exactly.
yeah. I'm really curious about urbanization. Is that having an impact on accusations because of people coming into contact with other cultures?
The urbanization that we're seeing in PNG now is sort of two-tiered. You have the employed group that are moving for work. And then you have the I wish I was employed group that are moving to be with those who are employed or be with their friends who are looking for work. And so you have the ones they are employed, they have a house, they might have a car, they're putting their kids in school, and they're moving around the country for work. And then you have the settlements, and you have the slums, basically, where you have them living in ethnic groups, and they'll all live together. And then they have a certain cohesion, even though they're often not from one single place of origin, but they're from a region of origin or a group of tribes of origin. And so we have, for instance, in the capital city, we have the Engas. They just say it's all the Engas, even though when we're in Enga, we're all very diverse and we know which tribe we're each from and who's at war with who and who can't go through that tribal land because they might get killed and killed by violence, not by sorcery, and so forth. But when you come down to the city, it's all by a sort of provincial block or by regional block. And then they will have their conflict between block to block kind of thing. So you see, as these settlers or these migrants are coming to the city, they're bringing with them their beliefs. And so then those beliefs are now able to, what word am I looking for? They're able to operationalize, they're able to activate in a setting that is removed from any traditional constraints. Like in the village, back in the provinces, the elders would say, no, boys, that's not how we do it. We have a tradition. This is what we do. Here's how we solve our problem. But when they move to the city, it's just the boys. And then they're like, but our buddy from the next street over, he says he knows what to do. He says, this is how you torture someone. And then the one from the other street says he watched it happen. Let's all get together. And then all of a sudden you've got this gang of young men that have no elders, that have no fear of the law, that have no groundedness in their land. They don't look at the land and say, this is my land. This is where my ancestors lived. I have respect for the land. I won't pollute this waterway. They're just aliens. They're just rootless. And in that context, they then attack people. And so you see instances of torture and murder going on in the cities, in the settlements of the cities, not necessarily like in downtown, but in the settlement areas, by these groups that are formed from diverse places, from diverse backgrounds that are now all ingesting the same stories. And it's very much a rumor mill where the story just goes around in a circle and circle and circle. And I guess you could probably say that they're forming their own new culture there. And this new culture is that there are people that we can identify who need to be tortured and murdered in public. And that's what they now think is right and real.
In a lot of the conversations that I've heard and been a part of, the significance of reaching children with curriculum to help them understand the problems with witchcraft violence, is significant, and you yourself have experience developing that, helping bring that into a community. When you look at that experience that you've had, and then you see that this new culture in this young generation, but not the newest generation, what is going to be an effective way to continue to reach those littles, but also is there a way to get a hold of what's happening in this young adult generation?
Yeah, good question. I feel like we're way behind where we should be, in PNG at least. I think there's, like the parent generation that has moved, some have moved for work, but others are moving for, I hope there's work. For education, you have the same thing. You have those who are in school, and then you have the ones who, I wish I was in school, or in some cases, maybe I'm glad I'm not in school. But you have the two tiers now of young people, of children. And I think for the ones who are in school, we do not yet have an attitude toward developing curriculum that is enough yet. It's far too many teachers are confused about what the laws are, what beliefs lead to violence, why that's bad, what they can say to their kids to help undermine and challenge these beliefs, dislodge these pro-violence tendencies. Like, this is not, in my experience, a significant part of teacher training. And many of the teachers are themselves prone to thinking, well, but it might be an evil spirit, it might be a witch, it might be a sorcerer, and violence might be a justified response to that. So reaching those kids with a curriculum through their teachers, I think, is a significant step in the right direction, has yet to happen. Reaching other kids, I think, will have to be done by the people they look up to. It will have to be done by sports figures. It will have to be done by the local teenage boys in their own community who those little kids see and see as leaders, as the big boys, as the mentors. If and when they start proactively taking a stand against this kind of violence, then the little kids will be like, oh, okay, we can do that too. But while the big kids are pushing in the wrong direction, the little kids will just fall in line and continue in the wake. I think because of the complexity of all of these beliefs and the way that, for most people, they believe a subset of these beliefs. They believe something about Sanguma, that there are curses, or there are demons, or there is sorcery, or there are witches, or these are beliefs that most people hold some of them, if not many of them. Certainly not all in the same configuration, but if we think of it as all the colors of the rainbow, they're all seeing in color. No one is seeing this in like black and white. I think the way I sometimes do. And so for them to say, but none of it is real, that's a step that almost no one can take. And so then they're left doing epistemology without any background in doing formal epistemology, and they're trying to figure out which of these things is right and which is wrong, and which of these things has enough justification for me to believe, and which does not, and which is a rumor, and which is not, and which is truth. And for them to actually ask those questions can be very challenging. Well, for any of us, it can be very challenging for any of us to begin asking those questions about things that we hold deeply, that form parts of our identity. Yeah. And so that journey is, I think, in many ways not yet beginning. We do have we do have some people who are able to say, this is nonsense, this is illegal, we cannot do this. But the number of people who are willing to stand up in public and say that is still few and far between. And hats off to the people who are doing it, but it's still few and far between.
Thank you so much. Learned a lot. I know that it's a big topic, and I feel like we could talk for hours about it, but we're at the end of the hour. So I just wanted to ask you if there's anything else you wanted to say today that we haven't covered yet.
My goodness, the hour has truly flown.
Yes.
I think one of the things that I wish we could have talked more about, maybe we can in a future episode, but is to talk about the people who are taking a stand against the violence, who are doing the rescues, and who are helping the people who have been accused and tortured recover and regain a place in their communities and help them finding, ways to express their rage and their grief and their trauma, and the amazing women and some men that I know that have survived this and are still looking for a place in the world where they're safe and where they can feel like they're part of a community again. And the instances where, the children of these people, the life that they live and the struggles they go through. This past year, we've had 2 children of accused witches, tortured witches, whose mothers survived, but now the children have been murdered because they are rendered that much more vulnerable because of the accusation that was against their mother. So it's this very complex web. I think today maybe we talked a bit more about the beliefs behind it, the stories of the humans who are going through it and what it does to them and how they struggle with that. And the helpers, look for the helpers, right? The people who are making a difference. I like to talk about them too sometimes. So anyway, like you say, there's much to talk about here. And thank you for the opportunity to share this little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. And I'll definitely need to do a few more episodes, I feel, to cover this broad subject. So next time we can focus on the people of, so thank you. And now Sarah Jack and Mary Bingham have a special update from Papua New Guinea.
Outlined by CDW News, Jonathan Soapy Unro. The return of Kathy Nye, a triumph for community, unity, and care. Laprapus, Wabag District, Enga Province, February 6th, 2025.
In a heartwarming event that underscores the power of community support and humanitarian efforts, Kathy Nye, a victim of alleged sorcery, was safely returned to her home village in Laprapus, Wabag District, after 2 months of treatment and care at the Yambu Health Center. The Caritas Anga team worked tirelessly to ensure her safe passage back to her community, with their efforts bolstered by the support of local authorities and church leaders.
Kathy, who had been admitted to the Yambu Health Center following an incident related to sorcery accusations, a sadly common issue in many parts of Papua New Guinea, received comprehensive medical and psychological care. Her time at the health center emphasized the need for community understanding and acceptance, challenging the prevailing stigma surrounding victims of such accusations.
The return journey, which took place today on the 6th of February 2025, was marked by a collaborative effort involving several key figures. Auxiliary Bishop Justin Ain Sunji from the Catholic Diocese of Wabag played a significant role in advocating for Kathy's right to health and safety, emphasizing the moral obligation to protect vulnerable individuals in the community. Alongside him were Richard Koki, the Rural Police Commander, Health Secretary Emmanuel Lair from the Catholic Diocese of Wabag, and various members of the law and order officials who ensured that the return was in line with a preventative court order, safeguarding Kathy from any potential threats upon her return and beyond.
This is a momentous occasion not only for Kathy Nye and her family, but for all of us in the community, as it emphasizes our commitment to justice and compassion, stated Auxiliary Bishop Sunji during a press conference before the return. We must continue to advocate for a society where such victims are treated with care and dignity rather than fear and suspicion.
Community members lined the route to welcome Kathy back, rejoicing in her safe return. The event served not only to celebrate her recovery, but also to raise awareness about the dangers of sorcery accusations and the need for comprehensive support systems for victims.
Caritas Enga, the organization dedicated to social justice and humanitarian aid, expressed gratitude for the collaborative efforts that made this successful return possible. Our mission is to empower and protect the marginalized in our society, said a spokesperson from the organization. We hope Kathy's safe return can serve as a turning point in changing mindsets about sorcery-related accusations.
As Kathy reunites with her family and community, advocates hope this incident will spark broader discussions on the importance of mental health care, legal protection, and the eradication of harmful traditions that perpetuate violence against women and vulnerable populations.
In a statement issued by the Rural Police Commander, he affirmed the need for ongoing education on human rights to prevent future incidents, stating, "It is our duty to ensure that no one else suffers the same fate as Kathy and I. Together, we can foster a safer and more understanding community."
This event is not just a celebration of her return, but also a call to action for continuous societal change, reinforcing the vital need for compassion, care, and a commitment to justice for Enga Province and beyond.
Thank you, Sarah and Mary.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us on Witch Hunt.
Spend time with us again next week.
Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.